At Nuremberg, the judges enter to hear the case for the defense in the war crimes trial.
In 1945, the United Press sent me to Nuremberg to cover the trial of Germany's war leaders. Over 60 years ago it was. Yet all those years have not dimmed the memory of one of the darkest periods in world history, when men were taken to the dock to account for their crimes against humanity. The story of the Nuremberg trial has been told so often that we've forgotten the debate that went before. Should Hitler's henchmen be tried in the United States or in Britain or even in Russia? Should they be tried at all? Wouldn't summary executions be a better way to deal with the men whose actions had sealed the fate of millions? But at a pre-trial conference in London, the American idea prevailed, that the prosecution should take place on German soil. For all of that summer, London was the focus of the Nuremberg preparation. The Americans, the British, the French, and the Russians haggled over the details, not the least of which were the actual crimes with which the Nazi leaders would be charged.
The Americans led the way, and for the Americans, Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson was appointed directly by President Truman. He inherited really diplomatic responsibility for the Allied discussions, which had started over the war years, and at London, he was the first among the equals who were the Allies negotiating.
I am convinced that we have an opportunity to bring to a just judgment those who have thought it safe to wage aggressive and ruthless war.
The charges that they begin to draft and they frame focus on three principal crimes, three substantive crimes: the crime of waging aggressive war, the crime of committing crime in war, battlefield crimes or war crimes, and the crime against humanity, the crime of military perpetrators on civilians in occupied nations or even within their own nations. Before London and before the Nuremberg trial that followed, those had never been topics of international agreement or subjects of prosecutions brought against national leaders.
In the end, the London Charter, as it came to be known, provided a framework for the trial that opened here in courtroom 600 on November 20th, 1945. You can imagine the tension on that first day of the trial. Justice Jackson represented the United States. In the way he spoke, the way he conducted the prosecution would signal how America saw the post-war world, just how serious it was about liberty, justice, and equality for all. So we correspondents hung on every word of his opening statement. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored, because it cannot survive their being repeated.
I remember hearing those words, admiring his rhetoric, and being inspired by them. I will never forget them. It was a new concept. Crimes against humanity, so far as I know, had no place in the legal vocabulary of the time. I was one of two who passed out the indictments, and we read the charges, which were conspiracy, crimes against the peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And the defendants, as well as we, were somewhat at a loss to know just what that meant.
Day in and day out, I took my seat at these trials, just feet from 22 men who had caused the death of millions. I can remember even now how I felt. I wanted to spit on them. Sounds strange, I suppose, to say that. Perhaps I felt that spitting on them would be a mark of how low I thought they were. To the readers of my United Press dispatches, I sought to convey the mood in the courtroom, the madness of Rudolf Hess, the arrogance of Hermann Goering, the chilling testimony of Rudolf Hess, who presided over the gas chambers of Auschwitz for 3 years. We watched film of the concentration camps, footage taken by American cameramen when the camps were liberated. The shock was all around me. Some of the defendants put their heads in their hands. Others sobbed openly. Like my colleagues on the press benches, I felt that at that moment, 9 days into the trial, the fate of these monsters was sealed.
We saw mountains of bodies. We saw people being tortured. We saw what went on inside the concentration camps. Goering put his hand to his mouth and said in an audible voice, "Oh, this is nothing but propaganda like Goebbels could have done." But the effect on the rest of the defendants, the defense counsel, the prosecutors, and the judges was so extraordinary that Lord Lawrence had to adjourn the court. It was impossible to carry on the proceedings.
The story of the Holocaust that featured in the Nuremberg trials shocked the world. In London, the Daily Express mounted an exhibition of photographs from the concentration camps. Londoners studied them in silence. In the cinemas, newsreels were hard to bear. Some audiences left in tears.
What the Nuremberg trial process did for the man in the street, even in the short term, was start to develop a record, a factual understanding of what the Nazis had done. And that became important early. What it did for history was provide a historical record, which, of course, is the basis of our understanding of the Holocaust. It's what makes Holocaust denial a crackpot venture rather than an intellectually respectable position in a debate. And it began to build the architecture of modern international law.
At the end, Hermann Goering, Hitler's deputy, cheated the hangman's noose by swallowing a cyanide pill. 10 of those on trial were hanged. 7 were jailed and 3 exonerated. The trials of lesser figures followed, but Hitler's high command had been brought to justice in an international court.
The United States, in more recent times, has not been at the forefront of developing modern international law in the legacy of Nuremberg. Indeed, has been the principal opponent nation of developments like the International Criminal Court. And that's a sad irony. But Nuremberg is a blink of a moment. 60 years is really only a couple of blinks of time. Robert Jackson had a great line. He said, "The meaning of Nuremberg will come to be understood in the century run." And we're only 2/3 of the way along that century run. So I would say Nuremberg is in some ways a work in progress.